What's going on, guys? It's Cimo, and welcome back to the top 100 Yu-Gi-Oh cards of all time. If you missed the first video, I'd highly recommend checking it out. I'll have a link on screen as well as in the description. But if you thought those cards were overpowered, you haven't seen anything yet, because this next set of cards is just going to take it to another level. So remember, we're weighting these cards based on how good they were back in the day, as well as how powerful they'd be now, and I'm more in favor of how good they would be now, just because it's more relevant, especially if they did come off, you know, the ban list or anything like that, or maybe change positions going from 1 to 3, something like that. But before we get into it, big shoutouts as always to all my patrons and my YouTube channel members for all of their continued support. And if you really want to help support the channel, hit the join button down below or check out the links in the description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Now, starting off with number 90, we have Fiber Jar. This is going to wrap up all of the jars, and we talked about a few of them in the last video, but Fiber Jar is probably the best of them all. Now, they all have this dynamic because they're flip effect monsters. They create this widely just highly volatile unknown scenario, because when your opponent sets a monster, especially back in the day, you don't know what that card is going to be. And yes, the other cards are very powerful, but Fiber Jar takes it to a completely another level, because you're not discarding your whole hand, you're not blowing up the entire field. Everything in the game is getting shuffled back into the deck, and it's like you're starting the game over from scratch. The dynamic that creates is crazy, because if that card gets flipped up, it doesn't matter who's winning, it doesn't matter how much advantage one player has over another. Fiber Jar is basically just like a reset button, and it's crazy. This is one of the craziest cards to have ever been printed. It was so hard to play around back in the day. This is a card that no one liked to play against, and it's one of those cards that a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, really hate. I think it's a lot of fun, but I still hate the card to death. But it definitely had to make it on the list somewhere. Again, it is a flip card, so it's rather slow, especially by today's standards. But again, the legacy that this card has is just pretty much just unmatched. It's just, there's no other card that's really ever been like it, and I felt that that's the reason it had to make it onto this list. And that is going to bring us on, though, to number 89. For number 89, I've got Judgment Dragon. Yeah, Judgment Dragon is pretty much another card that a lot of people really hate just because of how horrifying this card is. Basically, if you had 4 Light Sworns with different names in your graveyard, you just slap Judgment Dragon onto the field, and guess what? There was no once per turn restriction on that, so you could just slap 2 or 3 of them down if you had them in your hand. And not to mention, with a single Judgment Dragon and the cost of 1,000 life points, you could just nuke the entire board, and oh, guess what? That effect also wasn't once per turn. So if your opponent had cards that would float, or cards that had like once per turn protection or anything like that, you could just keep paying life points to nuke the board, and then you could probably OTK your opponent more often than not. Light Sworn was one of the most powerful decks for a very short time in this game's history, and Judgment Dragon is definitely the reason for that, just because it's one of the craziest boss monsters ever printed. And it's so crazy to think that out of all the cards on this list, or all the places Judgment Dragon could have fallen, it's only number 89. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about how powerful cards have to be just to eclipse something as powerful as Judgment Dragon. That's going to bring us on to number 88, though. And 88, we have Gateway of the Six Samurai. And rather than me talking about it, I have someone else in mind who has a much better history, and I guess, you know, a personal connection to Gateway of the Six Samurai.
I'm back. You guys probably already know me by now, okay? I'd like to thank Alex for actually featuring me on his channel. Alex, you're flipping amazing. Anyways, I'm here to talk to you guys how broken Gateway of the Six is, okay? This card, no. For those of you who don't know this card's effect, his effect reads that each time a Six Samurai monster is summoned, place 2 Bushido counters on this card. This card is a face-up continuous spell card, which reads that you can remove 2 spell counters to target a Six Samurai monster or a Xian monster on the field to make it gain 500 attack, which can help Xian beat over any problematic monster that you are facing against. 2, you can remove 4 Bushido counters from this card, add 1 Six Samurai monster from your deck or graveyard to your hand. If you guys never played Six Samurai format before, don't. You guys know what Legendary Six Samurai Keyzon does? Remove 4 Bushido counters, special summon Keyzon, synchro summon into Barkion, activate Gateway's effect, add Keyzon back, special summon Keyzon, make a second Barkion, constant spamming with Keyzon, guys. Gateway is super duper dumb and broken. No, no, no. And the last effect reads that you can remove 6 Bushido counters from this card to special summon a Shein effect monster from the graveyard. You often don't use the last effect of Gateway of the 6, but if you have Great Shogun Shein in the graveyard, you can easily special summon Great Shogun Shein back from the grave by just removing 6 Bushido counters from this card. As long as a 6 Samurai monster is normal summon or special summon, you will gain counters on Gateway. So can you guys imagine in the mirror match, if you're playing the mirror match against 6 Samurais, your opponent summons a 6 Samurai monster, you will gain Bushido counters. You can literally activate Gateway and then summon a Shein, get all your counters, and just pass to your opponent. And each time your opponent would have summoned a 6 Samurai monster, your Gateway will gain counters. And the really crazy thing about this card is that you can remove Bushido counters from the field. Okay, from the field. You don't have to remove counters from Gateway. Let's say you have 6 Samurai United up and also 6 Samurai Dojo up on the board. Okay, and those cards have counters and you top deck a Gateway. Let's say 6 Samurai United has 2 counters and Dojo has 2 counters. You can just activate Gateway and remove 4 counters, 2 from Dojo and 2 from United to search a monster directly from your deck. When Gateway came out, this card did not stay at 3 for a very long time. This card was super duper broken in 6 Samurai format that Konami had to immediately hit this card. The crazy thing about Gateway is that not only did it let you spam monsters, okay, like Grandmasters and also Kizan, but it enabled you to actually make rank 4 XYZs like Shockmaster. When Shockmaster was still a thing, you can easily make boards like Nachuribi's Shein with a face-up Shockmaster on the field. That is ridiculous. That is ridiculous. And with these reasons right here and how powerful this card is for a specific archetype, I really believe that this card deserves to be on the top 100 best cards of all time. This card was so good that Konami not only had to hit it, but they at one point actually had to ban this card. Gateway is definitely crazy, guys.
Now for number 87, I've got Shaddoll Fusion. Shaddoll Fusion is one of the most powerful fusion spells ever to be printed in this game's history because as long as your opponent controls a monster that was special summoned from the extra deck, you can special summon fusion monsters using Shaddoll Fusion, using fusion materials from your deck. That is just so crazy because not to mention that you basically get to summon the monster for free. You don't need the materials in your hand or on the field. But in addition to that, especially relegated to the Shaddoll archetype, you're triggering the effects of these Shaddoll monsters because they're being sent to the graveyard. So not only are you summoning a Winda or a Construct for most likely absolutely free, but then you're also triggering the effects of all your other smaller Shaddoll monsters like Beast, like Squamata, like Falco. And the amount of advantage that a single Shaddoll Fusion was able to generate could really just set the pace for how that game was going to play out. This created this dynamic in the format where you had to basically realize that if you had anything from the extra deck out, your opponent could just drop Shaddoll Fusion and you might just lose the game. So players were forced to realize that they had to play in a specific way to kind of play around Shaddoll Fusion if their deck was able to do so. Now, some decks are able to do this better than others, but I think when there's cards that create this dynamic in the game, and especially that generate this level of advantage, these are the perfect candidates for the top 100, and I think Shaddoll Fusion's definitely deserving of that number 87 spot. That is, however, going to bring us to number 86. For number 86, I've got another card out of the Duelist Alliance format, Apocryphal Towers. Yes, now Apocryphal Towers is one of the craziest boss monsters ever printed. I feel like I'm saying that a lot already, but that just goes to show the quality of the cards on this list. Apocryphal Towers is basically immune to pretty much all monsters that have levels lower than it, so pretty much at the time that was almost everything, meaning that there wasn't really anything that could affect it, and then also you have the fact that you could remove cards from your opponent's field with its once per turn effect, so having this just immunity to basically everything was just insane. The fact that it had so few outs, one of the only few outs to it at the time was like Diamond Crab King, which was like a V-Jump promo or a promo from a manga, or you had something like Utopia the Lightning that came a little bit later, which Europe didn't even get, so they had to play in that format without Utopia the Lightning, which I can't even imagine how that was the case. This card was just insane. It pretty much got to the point where if a Cleafor player went first and they were able to summon towers, which a lot of the decks were basically designed to turbo out towers as quickly as possible, if they got to towers, you almost lost that game just outright, and it also just affected monsters with ranks, not even just levels. So the thing is, this card got kind of power crept when Master Rule 4 came along because Link monsters don't have levels, meaning that every single Link monster in the game can deal with something like Apocryphal Towers, making it not nearly the threat that it used to be, but it's still an incredibly powerful card, one of the craziest cards ever printed, and it has that legacy that a lot of people just really hate, and that's why it made the list at number 86. This is going to bring us, however, on to number 85, and for number 85, I have ABC Dragon Buster. Yes, ABC Dragon Buster, again, a very powerful boss monster, kind of just another power creep and step in evolution when it comes to how boss monsters can really just help deal with the current metagame as it evolves. Dragon Buster may not have the built-in immunity that something like Towers did, but the fact that it had a way to kind of dodge removal with its ability to tag out, so to speak, and go into its original parts was just crazy, because then if you had something like Union Hanger on the field, you were able to attach other pieces to the ones that you just summoned, and then on your following turn, you could turn those pieces into another Buster, which will then maybe result in a second Dragon Buster. Remember, this card came out before Master Rule 4 when you were able to summon multiple Busters with ease. The fact that, too, it's a 3k body and it has a quick effect that you can discard a card to banish a card on the field, and that in multiples was basically just an unwinnable situation. Dragon Buster, you know, ABC was just one of the best decks for a very short period of time, and this all came from a structure deck. Keep that in mind. So Dragon Buster, again, just another evolution in boss monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! And well deserving of the slot it has on this list. This is going to bring us on, though, to number 84, and number 84 is going to be Skill Drain. Now, Skill Drain has been around for a very, very long time. I believe it debuted in Dark Crisis, if my memory serves correctly, like the 6th or 7th Yu-Gi-Oh! Set to ever be released, and to this very day, even though Skill Drain is limited to 1, it is still one of the most powerful floodgates in the entire game. I don't think there's ever been a point in time where Skill Drain hasn't been played in the game, because back in the day when Skill Drain was at 3, people were playing Skill Drain Beatdown with stuff like Fusilier Dragon, the Dual Mode Beast. You've got stuff like Chainsaw Insect, Goblin Elite Attack Force, things like that. Basically just massive beatdown games where Skill Drain would just make all other monster effects worthless and you have the superior monsters. But even now, Skill Drain is able to just lock down entire archetypes because they don't have ways to play around it, especially since the game has become much more monster and combo centric. If these cards, or these decks rather, don't have ways to basically out a card like Skill Drain, you see stun decks now like Draco, or just any stun decks really in general, will opt to play cards like Skill Drain because they don't really care, or something like Burning Abyss can play it since all their effects trigger in the graveyard. So sometimes having a card like Skill Drain can basically be a silver bullet and just win you a game outright because your opponent doesn't have any out to it. And Skill Drain, just being one of the most powerful floodgates to ever exist in this game's history, definitely deserved a spot on this list somewhere, and this is where it ended up. Now this is going to bring us on to number 83, and for number 83, we're going to talk about another fusion spell, Future Fusion. And I'm not talking about current Future Fusion, we're talking pre-errata, utterly busted as fuck Future Fusion. Future Fusion's initial printing allowed you to send the monsters the turn you activate the card to the graveyard. This was essentially an auto win button in decks like Chaos Dragons, because if they were able to load their graveyard up with all these different Chaos Dragon monsters immediately, they were able to just completely dominate the game, and there was no coming back from that. When this card was in its prime, again, you have to remember how slow the game was, so the fact that you were able to just get so many resources ahead of your opponent and basically just overwhelm them with advantage, this card was just nuts. It was really no surprise that it got banned not too long after because of the sheer power that this card possessed. And then it got errated and recently, not too recently, but I'd say relatively recently, released from the ban list. And the thing is now, it's still really good for what it is. We've seen it being played in stuff like Infernoids just because you're able to summon something like Tiara, but again, generate all that advantage by dumping your monsters into the graveyard, which have that synergy. And the more archetypes we get that have graveyard-based synergy and happen to also have a fusion monster that allows you to dump them all in there, that's where Future Fusion's really going to shine. So again, not the most relevant card at the moment, but it's just an incredibly powerful card. It's just been an auto win button in so many situations that it had to make the list somewhere, and I'm really proud that it made number 83. That's gonna bring us on to number 82 though, and for number 82, we've got probably the daddy of all boss monsters, Dark Arm Dragon. Holy shit. Dark Arm Dragon is just an absurdly just there's like no way to describe how powerful this card was. This card back in the day was north of $300 a copy. That's how powerful this card was. If you were not playing Dark Arm Return or Teledad back in its heyday, you weren't playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Because this card was just nuts. As soon as 3 Dark Monsters hit the graveyard, you were dropping Dad, you were banishing cards out of or you were popping cards by banishing your Dark Monsters. You could drop 3 of them just like you could with Judgment Dragon. Just the impact that this card had on the game. People still fear this card to this day, even though it's nowhere nearly as good, but people still find ways to incorporate it in solely dark-based strategies. I mean, I've seen Burning Abyss and other dark decks still try to play this card because it's just a free monster that's 2800 attack that at the very least can pop up to 3 cards on your opponent's field. Seems pretty good, right? And having that sort of graveyard manipulation can come in handy. This card is just, this is the reason why I quit Yu-Gi-Oh! The first time. Like, this 100% is the sole reason responsible for why I went on hiatus for several years, because the amount of just oppression that this card bring to the game was just completely untenable, and you know, that's just the impact that Dark Arm Dragon had. A lot of people quit because of this card, I think rightfully so, and that's kind of when we saw Yu-Gi-Oh! At its worst, because that's when the price barrier was just completely out of control. Luckily, I don't think Yu-Gi-Oh! Is nearly as bad as it used to be. It can still be very expensive, but again, this is the history of Dark Arm Dragon, and anyone who played back in the day knows just how crazy this card is. This is going to lead us to the last card of the video, though, number 81. For number 81, I'm going to end it off with Cosmo Dark Destroyer. This seemed like the video of boss monsters, and Cosmo Dark Destroyer, I think, rightfully deserves to be on here as well. This card is just, you know, when you have a card that has 3000 attack that can basically just be summoned out almost for free, pops a monster as soon as it's summoned to the field, and then it can't be targeted, and if it gets destroyed by card effect, special summons another monster onto the field in its place, which at best can have 2800 attack, and at worst, you know, can just help you summon out another one of these. Yeah, Dark Destroyer is fucking ridiculous. I mean, it's just a card that at 3, you were paying over $100 to $150 a copy when it was first released, because the fact that you could have multiples of these, the fact that it's not once per turn, the fact that it's able to pop any monster, the fact that, like, there's just so much upside to this. And yeah, you know, you have to have a Cosmo monster to tribute off to summon this, but regardless, the amount of combos that Dark Destroyer enabled, the amount of impact that it had on the game, because people basically had to build their decks around the fact that Dark Destroyer was in the format, because if your deck didn't have a way to deal with Dark Destroyer, then you were just screwed, because the fact that it's untargetable and replaced itself if it got destroyed was just so difficult to deal with, especially at the time of its release, that I definitely feel it's deserving of this number 81 slot, and a really great way to end off this video. So again, guys, this is just the beginning. We still have plenty of other videos to go. So if you thought these cards were overpowered, just you wait. It's going to get even better. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. If you really found this video entertaining, then consider backing me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.